Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. A long-awaited ceasefire deal in Gaza is being delayed after Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu blamed Hamas for a last-minute crisis that's led to the postponement of his cabinet signing off on the deal. Hamas refuted Netanyahu's claims the group had backtracked on any aspects of the draft agreement. The deal, mediated by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States, was announced Wednesday, setting off celebrations throughout Gaza as Palestinians expressed joy, relief, and deep sorrow over the past 15 months of attacks. This is 14-year-old Ahmed al-Athamna, who was displaced from his home in northern Gaza.
Enough with what happened to us. Enough with martyrs who are gone. Enough. It's enough. It is better to go back to our homes and sit in the rubble. This is better for us. It is easier for us instead of having martyrs every day.
Israel's war on Gaza, which UN experts, legal analysts, and many rights groups have concluded a genocide, has killed nearly 47,000 Palestinians since October 7, 2023, according to official counts. Another 110,000 Palestinians have been wounded, the true toll expected to be far higher. The ceasefire agreement, which is expected to go into effect on Sunday, January 19th, includes in its 42-day first phase a cessation of attacks on Gaza, a surge of aid into the territory, the return of residents expelled from northern Gaza, and a limited prisoner exchange involving 33 hostages held by Hamas and some 1,000 Palestinian prisoners held by Israel. It also includes the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the most populated areas of Gaza and the opening of Gaza's Rafah crossing with Egypt. The terms of the deal are nearly identical to a ceasefire agreement that was advanced in May of last year by President Biden. Since the deal was announced Wednesday, Reuters reports Israel has killed at least 70 more Palestinians in Gaza, including an overnight strike on Gaza City.
Overnight, they hit a house where 35 martyrs were killed. We urge the mediators who brokered this truce to hurry up making it come into effect. For it to be today is better than making it tomorrow. For it to be at 7 is better than making it at 8, because there are martyrs every hour. We lose homes every hour.
At least 20 people were killed in an Israeli attack on Jabalia earlier today. Many others remain trapped under the rubble. There are also reports more health workers have been killed since the ceasefire was announced, including Dr. Hala Akram Abu Ahmed, who treated patients at Al Ahli Arab Hospital. We'll have more on the ceasefire after headlines. In Washington, D.C., Pam Bondi, Trump's nominee for Attorney General, vowed not to politicize the Justice Department as she faced questioning by the Senate Judiciary Committee Wednesday. But when repeatedly pressed by Democratic senators, Bondi refused to commit to maintaining independence from President Trump and his possible request to prosecute journalists or other perceived threats. She also refused to rule out investigating special counsel Jack Smith or former Congressmember Liz Cheney. Pam Bondi also avoided directly answering questions about Trump's vow to pardon January 6 defendants and refused to say Trump had definitively lost the 2020 election. We'll have more on Pam Bondi's hearing later in the broadcast with journalist David Dayen. Florida Senator Marco Rubio, Trump's pick for Secretary of State, also faced a confirmation hearing Wednesday, receiving a warm welcome from his fellow senators as he expressed support for NATO, backed Trump's America First approach to foreign policy and diplomacy, and repeatedly warned of threats posed by China, which he called a dangerous near-peer adversary.
If we don't change course, we are going to live in a world where much of what matters to us on a daily basis, from our security to our health, will be dependent on whether the Chinese allow us to have it or not. That's an unacceptable outcome.
Activists with Code Pink disrupted Rubio's hearing. As they were removed from the session, protesters yelled, quote, Marco Rubio's sanctions are killing kids in Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, unquote. They also condemned his staunch support of Israel, shouting out, quote, you can't be a warmonger and a diplomat, unquote. 4 other Trump nominees face Senate confirmation hearings Thursday. White House Budget Director nominee Russell Vought, who indicated plans for major spending cuts, one of the architects of Project 2025. John Ratcliffe for head of the CIA. Sean Duffy, a climate crisis denier, for Transportation Secretary. And Chris Wright, Trump's pick for Energy Secretary. Wright is a fracking executive who vowed in his hearing to implement plans to expand fossil fuels by Trump. The climate group Sunrise Movement said 10 activists were arrested as they disrupted Wright's hearing on Wednesday. Protesters held a sign reading, "Oil CEO's profit, LA burns," unquote. During his hearing, Chris Wright said he stood by past comments linking wildfires and climate change is hype. ExxonMobile has filed a lawsuit against California Attorney General Rob Bonta and environmental activists after they accuse the fossil fuel giant of carrying out a decades-long campaign of deception that caused and exacerbated the global plastics pollution crisis. Exxon is the world's largest producer of single-use plastic. In its legal counterattack, the company accuses Bonta of making false statements about its advanced recycling technology. This comes after Bonta and 4 environmental groups, including the Sierra Club, sued ExxonMobil, alleging the fossil fuel giant spent decades promoting plastics recycling, even though many plastic products proved impossible to recycle at scale. House Speaker Mike Johnson on Wednesday abruptly removed Ohio Republican Congressmember Mike Turner as chair of the House Intelligence Committee, saying it was time for a fresh start during the new Congress. Turner later told CBS the shakeup came due to, quote, concerns from Mar-a-Lago. Turner's an outspoken military hawk and has advocated for continued U.S. military support for Ukraine. In January of 2021, he broke with his party and voted to certify Joe Biden's presidential victory. President Biden delivered his final Oval Office address Wednesday evening, warning Americans of growing threats to democracy and a, quote, dangerous concentration of power.
Today, an oligarchy is taking shape in America of extreme wealth, power, and influence that literally threatens our entire democracy, our basic rights and freedoms, and a fair shot for everyone to get ahead.
President Biden did not name Trump or Elon Musk, but warned about a tech industrial complex and an avalanche of misinformation and disinformation. In Ukraine, gunfire echoed over the presidential palace in Kyiv earlier today as Ukrainian air defenses fired on a Russian drone buzzing overhead. The incident came as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky held talks with visiting UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, who agreed to send further military assistance to Kyiv as he signed a so-called 100-year partnership treaty with Ukraine. Their meeting came a day after Ukraine's military said it had launched its largest attacks yet on Russian soil, prompting retaliatory threats from Moscow. Since November, Ukraine has increasingly been using U.S.-made ATACMS missiles and British Storm Shadow missiles to strike deep inside Russian territory. Meanwhile, the Biden administration Wednesday imposed new sanctions on hundreds of Russian entities and individuals accused of supporting Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The executive order requires Congress to be notified before any of the sanctions can be lifted, a move that legal experts have called Trump-proofing. The UN's human rights chief backed growing calls for the U.S. and Europe to lift sanctions on Syria as Syria rebuilds after the ouster of Bashar al-Assad. These sanctions were imposed shortly after the war in Syria broke out in 2011. As he visited Damascus Wednesday, Volker Turk also called for a national reconciliation process and warned outside parties against infringing on Syria's sovereignty.
The Human Rights Office of the United Nations will continue to support inclusive, nationally owned and nationally driven processes. There are still very real threats to Syria's territorial integrity, independence and sovereignty, which must be fully respected and rigorously upheld.
Earlier this week, 6 EU member states called for the temporary suspension of sanctions on Syrian transport, energy, and banking as the bloc assesses a new policy towards Syria following the Assad regime's collapse. And in Haiti, the United Nations warns a surge of violence by armed groups has pushed the number of people displaced from their homes past 1 million. That's more than 3 times the number of people displaced this time last year. More than half of those uprooted by the violence are children. The UN's Human Rights Office reports that last year, gang violence across Haiti left more than 5,600 people dead. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Nermeen Sheikh. Welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.